So we're hanging out in Fiji's Bay of Islands. We're surrounded by a ton of islands. Like some of them are only as big as a couple trees, like back there. And today happens to be bottling day. A number of years back, I put together a bunch of stuff that's actually been very useful for making neat things to drink. So let me take you down below and I'll share with you what bottling day means today. So first I'll share with you the setup that I just mentioned. Today happens to be kombucha bottling day. So this setup actually works for mead or cider or wine or beer or a lot of fermented things. I fermented guava and cranberry juice and mango juice and fruits that I don't even remember how to pronounce anymore. So the same setup works. Basically kombucha is a lot easier as far as cleanliness because you don't need to cleaning the bottles is a lot easier with kombucha. So this time we'll just go over the kombucha setup. So part of the initial setup was collecting a bunch of these beer bottles that were easy to reuse and cap. They've been very handy. The beer was very expensive to begin with, but I bought them for the bottles. They're small, only 330 ml, and these caps, you don't have to get a special capper, and they'll automatically, if you bottle them too soon and there's too much pressure builds up in there, it seems like instead of breaking, they automatically bleed on the air. So one thing that I'll do to clean these is put a little bit of rice. I'll just put a little bit of rice inside. With a bit of water. You could use sand or any kind of grain, wheat berries, and shake it. So this is actually an awesome, easy way without dealing with a brush for cleaning the bottles. I'll do a bunch of shakes with one hand, a bunch of shakes with the other hand, and I'll do this for all the bottles. For this kombucha, just sitting up here, we're going to go and fill 7 bottles. This is about 4 liters, 1 gallon, and it will work for about, depends on what you're using. It'll do 8 or 9 bottles for a like a wine or a cider or a mead, but for kombucha only does 7 of these bottles because you have to use some of the old kombucha for the new. Okay, so now all these bottles are clean, scoured on the inside with the rice. So now we want to sterilize them. For like a fermented drink, like a mead, then you'd want to use, to clean them, I use this sodium metabisulfite. And that will clean the insides, but you don't really need to go that way because the kombucha is more alive. So there I just use some vinegar. So I'll pour some vinegar in a little bowl, and then 50% water. So it's half water, half white vinegar. And then I'll just basically pour some in. Give it a little shake. Clean the vinegar, cleans everything else. Rub around the top with my hands. Rub around the whole bottle just to make it all clean with vinegar. Get the whole thing. So this guy is ready to put new kombucha in. So I'll do that with all 7 bottles. So kombucha is basically just fermented tea with sugar. So I made a bit earlier this tea. It's basically just 8 black tea bags and a cup of sugar. And then you want it to cool down. So you don't want this to be more than, say, 90 degrees Fahrenheit or 32 Celsius. So if it's room temperature, it's fine. This guy's about 30, so he's fine. Because you don't want to kill the Scooby. So this is the carboy or wort or whatever you call it. to hold the fermented stuff. It's for primary fermentation. This one is made of glass with a single wide opening at the top and the capacity of a little over a gallon, or 4 liters. Glass won't leach any chemicals, so you can easily use it for blueberry mead or guava cider or kombucha without blending any flavors. I searched for a short, wide container to maximize swing room in this spot, and then made a hammock to hang it from a single point as close as possible to the cabin top. Notice it swings from a single string in the middle. There's a backup string in case the primary string breaks. The single wide opening without a valve at the bottom will never leak and is easy to clean. You can stick your hand in there. I ferment things like kombucha and water kefir that need good oxygen flow simply by covering it with a breathable cloth like you see here. Fermenting things like mead, cider, or wine has still worked fine by loosely screwing on the lid so that it's not an airtight seal. This setup actually works surprisingly well. I've watched it swing around in 5 to 6 meter seas and 45 plus knots of wind without hitting the sides or splashing. In extreme conditions it'll knock up against here, but it's got to really rock a lot. And when it does, what I'll do is basically I'll toss it, because if we're rocking and rolling, I'm not really don't give a hoot about whatever's in this thing. So I dump it and clean this and put it away, secure it down below. If you want to keep the Scooby, then you can put it in here. I made this little extra mason jar with another little hammock for it that I can hang from the same spot, and he'll survive a lot more rocking and rolling. If you don't want to deal with that and still make kombucha, what I'd recommend, what I always do is one bottle I'll always keep pure, so that if you need to rebuild your Scooby, you can rebuild a new Scooby from one bottle of pure kombucha. And I've done it a few times, fine. So now we're going to go inside here and get ready to start bottling. We'll put the Scooby in that, and what I always have a habit of doing is pouring a bit of vinegar. It always seems like a balance, because it's pretty warm here in the tropics now, so I'll put a little, while I'm working on it, on the bottling and making tea for the next batch, I'll let that soak in vinegar. So that keeps the yeast at bay, because it's a balance of yeast and bacteria, the Scooby for kombucha. We haven't put anything in these bottles, so 6 of the 7 we're going to put in, I think this time we're going to put in some ginger. So I'm going to cut up a little piece of ginger. We'll take this one here and just put some little chunks in 6 of those 7 bottles. So I can't put any kind of sweet fruit in the kombucha when I bottle it, because it makes them, it's too much food for the yeast. They get too fizzy, too much CO2. So, because I don't have a refrigerator, so what I do is I put stuff in that's not sweet, like cocoa powder or ginger, like I just put in, or cinnamon, or maybe zest from lemon or orange peel, and that seems to work fine in the bilge unrefrigerated. Here in the tropics, like in Fiji, I've given this a week. So I've given the primary fermentation, I call it, 1 week, and then I bottle it, and then they'll sit in bottles for weeks to months, because I rotate them. I got maybe 30 some odd bottles, 7 at a time. They'll be, I go basically from the front of the boat to the back in the bilge. So they seem to be fine if you give it enough time, about a week or so. Now let's siphon the kombucha into the bottles. For that, we'll use this little strainer. I basically have a little sink strainer in a funnel. I'll wash that off in vinegar. And then we'll take a little siphoning. If you want to have a tube to siphon with it. And we'll stick the tube in. And I'll put a couple clamps in there to keep this tube more or less upright. And then it's a basic siphoning exercise. Oh, and I'll start this is the one without any ginger in it, because he'll be the possible starter for the event that I have to toss this and create a new Scooby. So we'll do that for all 6 bottles, or all 7 bottles. So I try to keep about 20% in this for the next batch. I think the purpose of that is to have the vinegar of it to protect the next batch of Scooby. It's like you want this Scooby to dominate, this bacteria yeast culture to dominate this new sugary sweet tea. So other yeast and bacteria doesn't take over. And to help it is the vinegary part of the previous batch. So I will basically clean this out and then put this in the new batch. First, I'm going to clean this. I'll just clean this out with vinegar. Toss them up above and they'll dry out in short order. To keep the yeast at bay, kind of like we let this Scooby sit in the vinegar, the white vinegar, while we're doing the bottling, I will clean this out and drain the top off, but not the bottom, because the yeast, I think, sinks to the bottom. So we'll basically drain this into another container. A bigger container would be better. There's a vinegar mixture we'll use to clean this. And then we'll strain out. It's like the bacteria or Scooby, there might be little chunks here or there. Especially now, because there's been some sailing, some agitation of this thing. So little chunks of Scooby are inside there, and this helps strain them out. We're getting close to the bottom. And what I'll do with this is pour it in this glass and try it. Waste not, want not. So take a last little bit of vinegar that might be lingering in this little container. I'll always take that and clean this out. Then you'll toss the strained, kind of the old kombucha, some water, And this is the black tea, the sweetened black tea. And then we'll top it off with water. If you want to make any other kind of fermented drinks, I'd recommend collecting a whole bunch of these yeast packets. I use champagne yeast, primarily because a brewmaster told me that champagne yeast could handle the most alcohol. Like a lot of beer yeast might kill itself in 5 or 8% alcohol, but wine or champagne yeasts can handle more like 14, 16, 18% alcohol before it kills itself. So I just get a bunch of champagne yeast packets, and then if you run across any neat juices that you'd like to try fermenting, you can use this same setup. Here, because we're back to the kombucha, we're putting this Scooby back in, and he acts as our yeast. We'll give it a little bit of a stir. And we are good for the next week. You want, like for kombucha, you want it to breathe. It's got to breathe air, so this is like a little old pair of shorts. So the oxygen can get in to feed the bacteria. And this little hammock is very useful. It's kind of amazing to watch this thing underway when we're rocking and rolling, and it doesn't spill. And that's good for another week. I'll usually label these guys. Not usually, but I'll always label them. What I'll do is so I'll label them like that so I know which one they are. K is for kombucha. If I'm making up a mead, I'll say an M. If it's cider, apple cider, then I'll use a C, and then whatever fruit or something is going in there. And then I will stick these guys. This is the one with nothing in it. Let's find the one with nothing. In a sock. Each one goes in a sock, like this, and tossed in the bilge. So the newest ones or the youngest ones are forward, and then I work my way back. So I'm just going to the back of the boat, reach in the bilge to grab out a drink. So that's it. Good luck putting together your setup and having fun.